he will be sa Why Dapig-Dapig, siya na lang po ang instructional designer for family issues na kuan na mo under sa theology. So nihangyo siya kay wala man siya today, kina siya kay with Father Joel. So kato lang introduce na lang po nako siya Father. So kami ang IDs. Thank you.
Thank you, Bar. Jai?
Hello po, good afternoon. So, along with Sir Myong, I will also be working with one of the subjects offered by the History Department, Political Science and History Department. Sir Myong will be working in Life and Works of Rizal, and I will be working for readings in Philippine history po.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jai. Hazel?
Hi, Father. Good afternoon.
Hello.
I'm Hazel from Languages, Literature, and the Arts. We have shuffled our assignment. Ma'am Judith will be the course team leader, and then I'll be the ID for Philippine pop culture. Thank you po.
Thank you, Hazel. Hi, Pam. Pam? Wala pa si Pam. Lynn?
Hi Father, may hapon sa tanan. Nag-rename ko no, so nahimo na siyang SBG. So meaning from SBG ko, and unfortunately ako ra ang na-assign. So I don't know kung saan na siya na murag daghan man gyud kaayo ang courses sa amo Father no. Gusto pa na ako i-clarify if pwede pa bang makadungag og isa. Otherwise, murag bugat gid siya because as you know, SBG is composed of two clusters, the accountancy and the B&M. So, basig mawala to ang beauty. So, di na ta makapang lipstick unya, Father.
Thank you, Lynn. Pam, are you there, Pam? Baka sira ang ano. Sige.
Fixing her mic daw, Father.
Okay, fixing. Okay, sorry. Sige. Okay. Hi, Pam.
Hi, Father. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We were introducing ourselves, tapos parang basically what course are we developing, or at least what unit we are representing.
Okay. Should I?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's your turn. Sorry.
Okay. Hello, I'm Pam Castrillo. I'm helping with art appreciation and probably with Philippine pop culture as well.
Okay. Thank you.
That's
Thanks,
it.
Pam.
Hello.
Thanks, Pam.
Thanks, Father.
Annalyn, hello.
Hi, Father. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anne from the Psychology Department. I was trying to comb my hair. And I will be
Don't worry. Don't worry. It's okay.
with understanding the self na GE 1105 together with Doc Lamsan.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. Maricar, hello. Good afternoon.
I will be working with Dr. Ranalan and Mamilin Abella po for interdisciplinary studies.
Okay. Thank you, Maricar. May we hear from thank you. May we hear from Jazzy? Hi, you're still on mute, Jazz.
Yun po. Hi, Father. I'm Jassy, assistant dean po sa law school.
Thank you. Thank you, Jazzy. And of course, Cheryl. Hello.
Hey, Father. Good afternoon.
Afternoon
I'm
po.
with Purposivecom, one of the members of the team.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you po. Okay. So once again, thank you very much. Maybe for some of you attending this session right now, Um, you might have heard parts of this already, since, for example, for SAS, we have been going through 5 or 6 sessions already. But for some, they would be listening to some of the things that I'll be saying for the first time. No? But this is actually one of the, siguro parang every time I'm giving a session, I'm able to parang revise further parang what the thoughts that I like to communicate, and at the same time siguro some of the ideas to make it clearer for everyone. And I think we're all here to more or less try to understand where we fit in this whole courseware development project, because um, really parang as instructional designers, parang in any courseware development process, parang the IDs really are pivotal in terms of the course, of bridging the design of the course and the actual implementation of the course. So in other words, parang as IDs, parang our roles will not just be limited to the actual course design part, but it will be something that will be, in a sense, iterative, because we will be following through how courses are going to be implemented, and then we will be evaluating as well. We will be proposing other instructional strategies or technologies to be able to improve our courseware further. No? So this session is really, in a sense, an orientation, a grounding in terms of uh, what we understand by instructional design, especially in the context of Ateneo de Davao University. So please don't get shocked if suddenly mag-pop out yung ulo ko dyan, because I will just spotlight myself for everyone muna. Sorry. Even I am maula jud ko pirmi mag-ana akong nauna. So what I will do is first talk about basically the title of this presentation is the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm as Instructional Design for Online Education. So to begin with, I think we need to say something about Jesuit education, because this is really where we're coming from. And I think one of the things that we were confused about, especially as we shifted online, was many of us were really expressing how we could trace what we were doing to what and who we are about as a Jesuit university. No? And I think parang over time, parang we're able to more or less try to recapture, or at least ground ourselves again in where this impetus is coming from and where this impetus will lead us, especially in the case of courseware development. So I'd like to say something first about Jesuit education. In the documents of the characteristics of Jesuit education, it talks about that. It talks about the distinctive spirit of Jesuit education, and I think this is really why we're undergoing this courseware development project, because now that we have shifted online, the question here really is, how can we still assure our students and our faculty, and in fact everyone else, that what we are doing when we are doing online education can still be distinctively Jesuit, can still be distinctively identified as Jesuit education. And perhaps maybe the question here is, what do we mean by this distinctive spirit? No? Now, this cannot just be captured in slogans or in keywords, no? But in the document, it says that this distinctive spirit has its roots in the experience of Ignatius. So this is where we're drawing our inspiration from again, especially as we try to, in a sense, uh, uh, find our bearings as we navigate this confusing and very challenging platform. No? And this distinctive spirit, I think, is the same thing that should be animating our own online education as well. No? So much of it really is, every time in the sight of Jesus, every time there's a moment of crisis, there's always a call to rediscover our roots. In the same way, I think this pandemic really has forced us once again to rediscover our roots, to refound ourselves, so to speak, especially in the context of what we are facing and what we expect to be facing and what we expect will be the future of Ateneo de Davao University. No. So all of this really is hinged on the spirit of Ignatius, but not only that, but also in his writings, in the Society of Jesus, and especially in the educational apostolates uh, that have emerged from the spirituality and the work of Saint Ignatius of Loyola. So this is where we situate ourselves, that this distinctive spirit is not just specifically Ateneo de Davao, but that this is something that we share and find resonance with in other Jesuit universities worldwide. So, so there's the challenge, no? How can we assure that we can still put that Jesuit stamp, Jesuit education stamp in online education as we shift online? I think we have to at least understand what Jesuits think of pedagogy. Um, Pedagogy for the Jesuits, at least as indicated in our documents, is not just about methodology, no? But that it is something that involves a worldview. And it says here, a vision of the ideal human person to be educated. So in other words, it's not just about technique, but it's really trying to embrace an entire perspective, no, about how we see ourselves, how we see our world, how we see ourselves in relation to others as well. So even from this very statement coming from the document Ignatian Pedagogy, a Practical Approach, we're seeing that Jesuit education cannot be reduced to just mechanics, cannot be reduced to just details or techniques or even the science of it, because it's really an entire, shall we say, worldview, as noted there. No, it's really an entire spirit which animates the principles that we have come to know as the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm. So at the outset, I think as in anything, parang we begin with the end in mind. No? And what we are doing at this point, no, is clearly once again to support our efforts at attaining the goal of Jesuit education, which in this case is really the full growth of the person, which leads to action informed by his or her own faith. And as you can read here from this document, this goal of action, okay, has certain characteristics. It's based on sound understanding. It's enlivened by contemplation. It urges students to self-discipline and initiative, to integrity and accuracy. When you think about these phrases, no, these are all challenges that we already experience as we have been teaching online for almost a semester now. No? We're always wondering about how we could encourage our students to really become more independent learners. We're always challenged by the fact that our students do not seem to be engaged and motivated to attend our classes, that we might have to employ other means in order to be able to bring them in, sometimes forcibly. There's always the question of whether they will be cheating or not, or whether they just take all these formative assessments or summative assessments for granted, and so on and so forth. I think all these details really, from this perspective, becomes understandable because, again, all of these are subsumed really in the total and holistic formation of the human person that we are aiming at least in Jesuit education. So the next question I think that we have in mind is, so where does instructional design come in, at least in this picture? What do we understand and how should we be understanding instructional design? Oh, Um, by instructional design, okay, there are several definitions of instructional design. Um, there's one definition, a very popular definition by Broderick, where he says that it's the art and science of creating an instructional environment and materials to bring a learner from a state of not being able to accomplish a task to a state of being able to accomplish those tasks. And if you look at the other definitions here, really the focus is, again, how do we bring a learner to be able, to a state where he's able to learn something? That seems to be the focus here of instructional design. These definitions, of course, have given rise to many models of instructional design. I think one of the difficulties that we had early on was really in terms of the debate that we had in terms of what instructional design should we be following. But if what I'll be showing here are just 12 out of the many instructional design models that are currently available. So you have here a classic, the Gagne-Briggs model, and then here's the Dick Carey model of instructional design. I'll just show them in passing. Another instructional design model. Here's another one, and 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 another one. So this might be familiar to us, the ADDIE model. And then there's 4C instructional design model. Now, if we were to learn everything, parang I don't think we'd be able to do something given the situation that we are right now. Perhaps many of us might just want to take a look at it so that we could, gain a certain perspective in terms of what ID models are actually available to us. But according to the authors Seal et al, basically, if you take a look at all these models, you can actually come up with the components of instructional design, which is being flashed right now in your screen. There's this part that talks about the analysis part, the design and the development, the implementation, and the evaluation. According to one author, actually, all these things are all variations of what is known as the ADDIE model. But if you step back and at least draw from our own experience of being in a Jesuit university and being familiar with Ignatian pedagogy, many of these ideas might actually find resonance with our own Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. But here's the catch, no? Instructional design models, as I have shown earlier, and as we have looked at some of its definitions, really focus on just creating an environment in order to bring a learner from a state of not being able to do something to a state where he's able to accomplish the thing that he's supposed to do. That seems to be, in my own estimation, very focused, but at the same time very limiting. No? Because I think the difference here in the IPP as an instructional design model is that it's not just focused on these specific things. In other words, when we're teaching, we're not just teaching so that students will learn, but this teaching is part, again, of a worldview, a goal which we would like to see in our students. We would like our students to bring them from a state where, we take them where they are and we lead them and form them into a state where they would be flourishing as persons. But flourishing not only for themselves, but flourishing, of course, for others. No? And part of this human flourishment that we're talking about is that this person ultimately, in his own educational journey, will be able in his life to also find the place of God in his own life. No? So that seems like a very bold and ambitious goal, especially when we're thinking of instructional design. That's why I think the main takeaway from all of this is that the IPP is more than just an instructional design model, but that it focuses on the holistic formation of the human person. Because if we take a look at the IPP, which we will do in a little bit, what we're doing in this quote-unquote instructional design model is to create this environment where we are engaging learners and where we are bringing them to the state where they could be realize their full potential as persons for others, with an appreciation for truth and a grounding in their own faith. No? So I think yung nga parang I don't think we have to look far and wide for our own instructional design, because what we have here is really more than instructional design. And I think this firms up our conviction. And I guess parang at this point, if we take a look at what we have been doing, perhaps we've already been doing it as we have adapted to the online shift, no? Without us probably expressing it in a similar manner, perhaps we could also already sense a certain resonance with the ideals and the spiritual inspiration of this university, and at the same time what we have actually been doing as we've been teaching our students even before we have shifted online, and now that we have already shifted online. Okay. So let me proceed once again to this third part, which is about online education. Okay. But before I proceed, let me just welcome again those who just came in. Si Roy just came in. And of course, kanina, I may have forgotten to ask si Josil to just introduce. No? Maybe let's take just a brief mental break and maybe ask Roy and Josil to just introduce which unit or which course are you representing as instructional designer. Would that be okay?
Yes, Father. Good afternoon, everyone. DLLA lang po, instructional design po ng GE 1106 or purposive communication.
Thank you, Josil. And then Roy?
Hello, Father. Ang hirap talaga. Grabe ang very low bandwidth. Kanina pa ako gustong pumasok. Anyway, I'm representing the School of Nursing, and I think I'll be doing almost all of the courses for nursing.
Thank you. Thanks, Roy.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you. So welcome again, and hopefully we are recording this, so we could share this with you in case there were some points that you have missed earlier.
Yes, Father. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roy. So at this point, thank you again, Josil. Sorry, I must have missed kasi ikaw yung unang nag-greet ko kanina. I thought I already finished asking you. So to continue, shift naman ako para iba naman. So what is online education? I think this is really a thing which we have to clarify, because I guess parang our own understanding and expectation would, in a sense, be shaped by what we understand by online education. So to start off, in the literature, there's a difficulty in terms of defining what online education is. No? And in one study, I forgot to place the citation there. Please forgive me. Do not give me a failing mark for forgetting that citation. In a study where a study was conducted to collate basically definitions of online learning, online teaching, online education, etc., etc. And in analyzing these definitions, they more or less distilled the essential elements in this definition. So one of the distinct elements is that, at least when we talk about online teaching, learning, education, blah, 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 okay, first, there's really, these are synonymous terms, and in a sense, even if they're talking about online learning or online education, the concepts are really very overlapping. No? Another essential element in terms of these definitions is the use of technology. So I think this is really where I think for many of us, online education has become a very challenging thing to do, because we've been used to using certain technologies that have not been adapted, that have not adapted to the kind of medium or platform that we are in right now. Another crucial element is the time element. So much so that when we talk of online education, it could be conceived in terms of it being synchronous and it being asynchronous. So really, when we say online learning, it's not really exclusively asynchronous. No? So even if we're conducting a synchronous lecture, that can still be construed and accepted as online learning. However, okay, we move to parang other elements. Mamaya ko na dagdagan yung however ko. No? Some other common themes that arise in terms of the definition of online education is first, the importance of interactivity. That because the same interaction that you used to have in the face-to-face setting is absent from an online platform, parang there are many ways to simulate this and foster this interaction and interactivity. So that when we speak of online learning, parang it's really designing content which students can interact with and designing activities that can still engage students and that can still lead students to engage with each other and with their instructor. Another common theme which perhaps I like to just point out is that we may not be realizing it, but for example, when we're doing an asynchronous session like this, but you know, we are forgetting the physical distance, which is really a very crucial element in terms of when we're teaching online. No? Unlike when people are in the same in the same location at the same time and in an enclosed space, no? This physical distance is something that we often miss out on. No? We miss out that while we might be lecturing here, students might be preoccupied with something else or might be asked to do something else or might be learning in an environment which is not exactly conducive to learning. But this is something that has to be taken into account as well. And at least in the definition, this is often emphasized because because of the physical distance, you cannot, in a sense, guide students as much as you would if you were in a face-to-face setup. And therefore, part of the design in online education has to provide for that kind of instruction, a clear, detailed instruction, so that despite the physical distance, students will still be able to follow what we would like to teach or where we would like to guide them to. Okay. And another common theme that comes up in the definition is that there's always a comparison to a traditional classroom, a face-to-face setup. So these are all elements that we can find in definitions pertaining to online learning, online education, online teaching. Now, one of the things here, yun na pala yung name po ng authors of that paper. No? They first define what online learning means, no? And I just highlighted some crucial phrases there to illustrate. Una, in the first definition, there you have the synchronous classroom. In the second definition, you have the asynchronous environment. Okay, so that seems to be, you know, where people could diverge in terms of their understanding of online education. The other thing which comes out, which is not exactly very different from how they understand each other, is that first, in the first definition you have there, in online learning, it's not dependent on physical location. So as a matter of fact, it can happen anywhere and in any place. You know? And that's why sometimes parang we sometimes find it difficult, because if a student is in a place which we would not normally say or we would not normally refer to as a conducive learning environment. Supposing he is in a beach listening to your lecture, parang some of us get shocked or parang are a bit taken aback by it. No? But this is really a characteristic of online learning. No? You can be anywhere. You could be right now in your bed just listening from afar to this session and still be doing online learning. Uh, Again, another characteristic that comes into play is that um, while we may want students to always attend our classes regularly, um, and part of the affordances of online learning is that learning can be done at their own convenience. No? I think we still haven't reached that point where we have really maximized what online learning can do. I think we're still holding on to what we have been accustomed to in terms of physical place and at the same time set and scheduled times. So once again, part of this not being dependent on a physical location means that they do not have to be co-present even online, so that, in other words, in an asynchronous environment, people could be interacting at a certain time and then somebody will just catch up and just give in his comments or his answers parang after a certain period has already lapsed. No? So all these things I think that we are experiencing in terms of um, uh, our diverse experiences of teaching online may have perhaps exhibited many of these elements that we can find in definitions of what online learning is. However, Singh and Thurman offers a definition, taking into account the themes, taking into account parang what they have discovered in their own analysis of these definitions. So their definition here is online education is education that's being delivered in an online environment through the use of the internet, again, the technology component, for teaching and learning. This includes online learning on the part of the students that is not dependent on their physical or virtual co-location. Okay. Very crucial to understand. And teaching content is delivered online, and instructors develop teaching modules that enhance learning and interactivity in the synchronous or asynchronous environment. Okay. So basically what they tried to do was just to put in many of the common themes or common elements that they discovered in the definitions. So I guess parang we need to clarify parang how we understand online education, and I think this is a good starting point for us to imagine parang how online education can look like. In other words, yes, it can move towards a fully asynchronous setup, but also it can also move towards a synchronous setup. No? But I think the crucial thing here is, once again, trying to understand and determine the context of where our students are coming from. And I think this is where we were trying to address some issues pertaining to connectivity, issues pertaining to access to technology, or even issues pertaining to distance, or issues that pertain to some students being in locations where they practically are off the grid, and so on and so forth. So I think the way by which we are to design courses in terms of whether there's going to be more synchronous or asynchronous has to take into account, again, that context. Next. So moving from instructional design and online education, I think we have to go back again to the IPP. And just so siguro this is just a brief, not exactly a detour, but this is like ambling along, no? Because I think, once again, to emphasize that what we're doing in terms of instructional design parang has a deeper meaning in terms or in the context of Jesuit education. So when you look at the IPP paradigm, one could think of it, one could look back to its spiritual inspiration. And its inspiration is in the experience of the spiritual exercises. So once again, linking it with the idea that was presented earlier of how or what makes Jesuit education very distinctive. So again, one of the things there is in the experience of Ignatius and in the writings of Ignatius. And here, what we're seeing is precisely that connection. So in the Ignatian paradigm, the interaction that happens in the spiritual exercises could be construed in the form of this through this diagram, wherein the director basically guides and leads the retreatant to be conscious and aware of God's movement in his or her own life. The director does not push the retreatant, but provides the condition and the capacity and capacitates the director capacitates the retreatant so that eventually the retreatant will be able to have more or less a more personal and intimate relationship with God. I think the presupposition here of Ignatius is that God, not perhaps, but this is what is written in Ignatius's writings, that God deals directly with the retreatant. And all the director does is to make sure that the retreatant is receptive to how God deals directly with him or with her. Now, it also presupposes that the director has a certain familiarity of how God works so that he or she will be able to guide the retreatant to be sensitive to God's movement as well. So that is why, aside from this movement between God and the retreatant and the director and God, there is, of course, that movement, that relationship that happens between the retreatant and the director. Having said that, this same spiritual inspiration translates itself in the relationship between the teacher and the learner, so that conceived in terms of the educational experience that we are trying to replicate in our educational institutions, what we're doing is this, no? If we replace those terms earlier, God, retreatant, and director, we could replace them with God as truth, the learner as the retreatant, the teacher as the director. And the same dynamics that I was talking about earlier also happens in this relationship. No? I think the assumption or the belief that we have here is that truth, okay, truth can speak for itself, okay? And what we're doing is to help the learner become more receptive so that he may be able to pursue that truth. No? And that's why the relationship between the teacher and the learner is founded on, again, the teacher's familiarity with the truth, the teacher's appreciation for the truth, and at the same time, his or her own care for the experience of the learner, for the disposition or the context of the learner, so that he or she might be able to be receptive to that truth. So once again, the same dynamics happens that happens in the spiritual exercises is now being transposed in the context of an educational paradigm. So if we put them side to side, no, it's not very surprising that in Jesuit education, simulating what happens in the spiritual exercises, we're not trying to impose truths on the learner, but what we're trying to do is to make the learner become attuned and capable of discerning what is true. No? And I think this is a disposition that is very important, and I think this is what's behind what we are trying to do in our universities. No? This understanding of the dynamics that takes place in our relationship with our students. No? Yes, there are points where we might have to take them by the hand and guide them, but at some point, we would have to also provide for the experiences for them to learn on their own. And I think that is once again a hallmark of this Jesuit education. So from that spiritual inspiration, we are now, this spiritual inspiration has been codified in a sense in the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm. This Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm, okay, once again, cannot just be treated as an educational theory, because it's not just a theory. Um, as I presented earlier, this is really stemming from an experience which is now being communicated through the many institutions of the Society of Jesus, and something that, in a sense, we are also sharing and are still trying to share with people. So that's really the whole reason behind it. So this Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm has been codified in the document, in the Characteristics of Jesuit Education, which was released in 1993. And it consists of 5 principles. Again, just to review, I think many of us have, as I said, I think I've already given a talk about this 2 years or 3 years ago. Again, first principle is context, where, as noted in the documents, it's all about showing our personal care and concern for the individual. This is why we want to understand Jesuit education always begins with understanding the persons that I'm going to teach. No? Usually, perhaps in our own teaching, no, our interest as subject matter experts is, what am I going to teach? What is the content that they need to learn? Okay. Now, in Jesuit education, parang turn it upside down, and instead of asking what is it that I'm supposed to teach, I begin with the question, who will I be teaching? Uh, I think this is really perhaps something that we might have overlooked, no? Or something that we may have taken for granted. But this is really, again, a hallmark, or at the core of Jesuit education. We begin with where the person is. If you look back again at the writings of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, when he wrote the spiritual exercises, it's really one instructionally designed spiritual exercise. No? It's very structured. There are prescriptions in terms of what persons can do, etc., etc. But you know what he did? He wrote there in his annotations that the exercises always need to be adapted to the situation and the disposition of the retreatant. In other words, forget, even if you have a well-planned design there, even if this is something that you want to teach, you always begin from where the learner is coming from. This I think is something that needs to be highlighted and emphasized all the more, especially in this time of the pandemic. All of us are struggling. All of us are going through difficulties, no? Of which not many may know of, and yet this is our expression precisely of that care and concern. No? So you might think, for example, na bakit ba nag-release si, why is Father Joel or the university president always talking about parang delaying assessments for a year? Bakit kailangan don't pressure them too much, etc., etc. Ito po yung pinanggagalingan nun, no? Parang some of us kasi feel na parang even at these times that we have to maintain the rigor, we have to maintain, yes, these are important things, no? Like you, parang I'm also teaching, and sometimes parang there's that struggle because in the discipline that you've been trained in, always that is something that has always been emphasized, no? But then again, in a Jesuit university, no, considering the situation that we are in right now, I think this is something where, I mean, parang a thing that we have to take on, especially during this time. That's why we're doing this courseware development project, because we want to create courses that are responsive and understanding of where our students are coming from. Not so much of the content that we want to teach. No? You might say, so what happens to us as a university? Okay lang yun. No? It will come. No? There will be occasions wherein we could also continue teaching that. But at this point, I think we need to design our courses to show our care for our students. No? Not just for their mental welfare, but also for their psychological and emotional welfare. So as instructional designers, yun po, and maybe this is where we will come into friction with our co-faculty, because the struggle here is, no, gusto ko ipasok ito, gusto ko kailangan ganito, ganito, ganyan. No? But as instructional designers, taking into account this principle, I think we have to find a certain balance where we are still able to teach the essentials, but at the same time, parang teach it in a way that it does not parang put the students at a disadvantage. The next thing is experience. And here what we're seeing is that experience is where, at least for Ignatius, if you are going to really teach somebody, no, don't just teach him the content, teach him how to learn the content. And I think this is the whole point with, behind this experience component. No? So in other words, in terms of its implication in our own instructional design, it's not a matter of just filling in the content. I'm sure parang in some disciplines, our interest is that we should be aiming for the board exams, dapat ganito, ganyan. You know, I think I understand that, though, parang, and I think it is very important, but surely we could find a golden mean between where we are at this point and some of the things that we would have to be preparing for. No? It doesn't mean watering down everything. It means teaching strategically and designing courses strategically. So I think part of the thing here is really, again, parang how do we provide a scaffolding so that students can learn the content even beyond the course, even beyond the time that we are there teaching them or we are there guiding them. I think that's the greatest thing that we could always leave to our imprint on our students when they can at some point do that on their own. And I think this is what Jesuit education wants to do. No? I remember when I was a young novice, our novice master always emphasized, no, parang when he gave something, parang minsan nga, parang ano ba yan? Parang konti lang. In my mind, parang sabi ko, parang this is boring because why he's just talking about a few things, no? But later on, I think the point here was that, you know, behind it, no, was not so much the content, but learning the structure and the principles behind the content. No? And this is parang what we mean in shaping the experience. No? So as a matter of fact, and for many of you who are senior teachers, diba? If you've been teaching for more than half of your life, you realize that for many of our students, many of the, unless talaga it was something that really engaged them, then they'd remember particular lessons. But for the most part, what they take away from us is really the habit of thinking and the habit by which we try to understand things. No? And they also remember, of course, the person that we are in providing that learning experience for them. No? Kaya I think this is one of the things that in Jesuit education that makes this very different. No? Because yun nga, parang more than anything else, parang the experience that you provide is an experience that could not be forgotten. No? I think yun parang, I think it might seem like a very, once again, very ambitious goal. But in designing our courses, especially how can we design it in such a way that it becomes an unforgettable experience, that it fully engages the person, so to speak? Okay. The next part, reflection, I think parang does not need much explanation, but really it's just about deepening. No? It's not enough to be able to have that experience, but it's even better to be able to reflect on that experience and deepen and relish that experience. So much so, the philosopher has said that an unexamined life is not worth living. No? In the same way, I think, taking off from that inspiration, what we're doing is to make students appreciate their life all the more by teaching them the facility to be able to reflect on their own experience. So in our courseware, we have provided something like this. It might seem like a very easy intervention, but it's instilling a kind of thinking, no? Sometimes nga ginawa na ng meme ng mga estudyante natin na pag nasa senior high ka o pag nasa Ateneo ka, puro reflect, no? When I went through my own Jesuit education, parang as a college student, parang nainis ako kasi parang lagi na lang parang there's a reflection paper, lagi na lang parang an opportunity to explain what you feel, explain what you think, no? Ang daming ganun, no? Only to realize parang decades after that, it's something that takes root in you parang in the end, and it forms you into becoming a certain type of person. And I think what we're doing here is sowing precisely those seeds so that our students may experience what we may have experienced in our own lives as well. The action part, I think this is where, again, very important, because what we're doing, what we're learning, what we're going through, okay, is not only for ourselves. I think this is the principle behind it. No? Whatever we have learned, no, is not for our own accolade, it's not for our own use, but it's really parang training ourselves so that we could be of use for others. No? But ako parang I feel passionate about this because I'm looking at my own formation as a Jesuit, no? And I'm seeing that why do we have to go through a very long formation? Why do you have to do parang all these things, no? Parang and for other people might think parang over na yan, sobran masyado yan, no? But the whole point is because when the time comes, you will have to use it, and you will use it to be able to contribute something, no? And I think this position is something that we need to instill. And I think for many of us, teachers and faculty here, nandun sa atin, I think, just imagine parang the drive that many of you have in terms of engagement, of advocacies that you're there, that you're lobbying for, in terms of projects that you're involved in. Action, no? Parang we're doing our part despite our limitations. We're harnessing what we have been given so that we could be of use for others. And that's the same disposition, I think, that we're trying to communicate to our students, no? Na ngayon pa lang, parang sige, whatever you have there, ibigay mo, parang pour it out, no? Bahala na. I mean, people might say things about what you have, but what you can do, give it out, spend yourself. And in spending yourself, I think this is where parang we discover parang the point of whole life, parang you're like a candle that is meant to burn to the ground, no? And if that doesn't happen, parang of what use will you be if you don't spend yourself up, no? And I think this is very strong, a very strong facet of not only Jesuit education, but also Jesuit spirituality. Bigay tayo, no? Parang, let's, when we talk about magis, ito yun. Parang, you give what you can give, no? And give what you can give, no? And I think this is the disposition that we're saying, no? We're moving beyond paradigms wherein all work that you do has to be measured or has to be, no, parang that's not the point of it. The point of it is that your ultimate meaning in life will be seen in how you have made use of yourself while you are still alive. And I think this is what underlies this very principle. But of course, action that doesn't, uh, 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 you know, action that is not evaluated, that is not assessed, can also become very dangerous. No? But evaluation, as we understand it, is a form of reflection. But it's not just a reflection on the content, but it's really an evaluation of your total growth as a person. No? And I think at a certain point, you always have to know as a person how else you can grow, no? Kasi pag feeling mo parang you've pushed yourself to the limits already, that this is, you know, uh, wala, it will end up becoming a very boring life. Sure, parang it will be difficult, no? Sometimes to be not boring, parang sometimes you have to put yourself in situations where you will be unsettled, no? Or unsettling conditions, no? Um, but here in evaluation, parang it's really about parang seeing how you're growing, no? It's you taking time to assess whether, you know, how else, parang what aspect of my life do I still need to improve? What aspect of my life do I still need to challenge, no? And so on and so forth. Now, for some of us who might be familiar with the Ignatian examen, ito yun, no? It's really looking back at the entire learning experience to see where I am, where I am finding it difficult to learn, where I am finding it easy to learn, and how I can prepare myself again for the challenges that lie ahead. So this is the spirit that underlies these principles, no? So when we take a look at it, parang this diagram basically captures parang this whole instructional design model, no? The experience, reflection, action, evaluation part takes place or is created in a certain context, understanding the context of the learner. So that if we place it again in the teacher learner relationship in the IPP, what we're doing as teachers is, let me point it there, no? Creating precisely this whole environment we're in with the dynamics of the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. This learner can pursue the truth, no? In his own life. So yon, parang I think, I hope parang I'm making myself clear here, and hopefully parang I'm able to at least enlighten parang this whole perspective that underlies Jesuit education. So I think the question for us now is, with this context, parang how do you apply the IPP as instructional design? Once again, we have to take note that this is a very different learning environment. It's not the same as the environment that we used to teach in. And this environment has certain conventions. In a sense, we are teaching in a new culture. No? And this culture has certain cultural elements. No? Forgive me for my use of the term. No? Parang I'm looking at it parang from an anthropological perspective. No? And these cultural elements are identified by, you know, group communication. We're in a classroom, parang you can't have everybody talking at the same time. But in this learning environment, everyone can just pitch in their ideas anytime. No, you come up with a forum activity. Everyone can just, you know, pinch in their thoughts. No, you're lecturing through you're live streaming through YouTube, then you have many people talking at the same time. Sometimes it feels that they're not replying to each other's questions anymore. But that's a facet of this learning environment. The other things here, I think, resonate already with the definitions that I have presented earlier. That it's not dependent on the place. You know, it's really geared towards asynchronicity. Time is something that the learner owns, and that the learner has to be responsible for. And all the content here is being mediated by text. No? If we are to read everything that happens in this platform, it can be read as text. The videos that they submit, the audio files that they submit, the PowerPoint, etc., etc. But all of these texts are enhanced by multiple media, so that you can have your video, your TikTok video, etc., etc. And at the same time, as a feature of this environment, when we talk of computer mediated messaging, it means that everything that you say here will be archived and can be searched, no, over time. No? So in a sense, parang as a teacher, there's a great responsibility that is being heaped on you, no? Because whatever you say here leaves a digital trace, no? So kumbaga, it's a challenge when you're delivering a lecture or when you're creating content for a lecture to be really meticulous in terms of what you are saying, because people can always watch it, no? And they can even watch it way long after you've already delivered it, no? And you will be held accountable as if you were just saying it for the first time, no? But these are all facets of this learning environment. We could see that in social media, for example. If we were to take a look at the instructional design, I will just change my screen so that I don't interfere with the view here. If we're talking about instructional design, no, in that book by Senamo and Kalk, no, they talk about the essential elements of instructional design. No? Outcomes, assessments, activities. Parang, we're talking about aligning even all of this, no, so that parang it could make for a really cohesive learning environment. Now, these same elements of instructional design are in effect mirrored as well in the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm. But the IPP goes beyond just these essential elements. Because when we take a look at the IPP, okay, some of us, at least in the syllabus, no, know that this IPP in the concrete expresses itself in the prelectio, lectio, and repetitio. No? And this experience, which happens, for example, can happen now within a module, but this concrete method of arranging content or sequencing content is happens or takes place within the context of the IPP, so that what is contained in what you give as prelectio or lectio or repetitio has already been shaped by the elements of the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm. So this is where, as I mentioned earlier, the IPP goes beyond just mere traditional or instructional design, because once again, parang it takes learning from a very holistic perspective. So to look at the IPP as instructional model, I have in some of the questions here reformulated it so that it could be adapted to our context. No? So in terms of context, I think the question that we'd like to ask here is, what do I need to know about my students at this time of the pandemic in order to prepare to teach them well online? So yung po, parang I think parang even just that question, as we're facilitating our team members, no, as we are facilitating our colleagues, no, is a very important question already to ask. And as I've said earlier, this is a hallmark of our Jesuit education. This is our starting point. No? And from there, there you have now the experience, reflection, and the action part. No? Where in the experience, what we're saying is, what we're asking, what we'd like to ask is, so how can we create an engaging online experience that will help our students care or connect to the subject that I'm teaching? Notice the use of the affective terms in this particular question. I did not say just learn or absorb or whatever. what I'm using here, and these words are not just my words, but I'm really taking inspiration from what is in the IPP. It's about the affective, no? Experience here has to be an affective experience as well, because this is the only time when we can fully engage our persons. Now, our learners, no? Now, this could be challenging for certain subjects that are really highly cognitive, no, or a bit in this, a bit abstract, no. But certainly parang we know of teachers who are able to make a very, parang brain heavy subject seem like it's something that's very exciting and something that's very engaging, no. So I think this is the difference that we have when you're before a teacher who really knows parang how to teach, because a very boring topic or a very, parang a topic that you've already heard before, as the teacher explains or crafts the experience, suddenly parang it generates parang a lot of interest. It begins to generate another, you begin to feel something for the subject. Kaya nga parang I think an indicator of whether you've taught well is if students feel parang I love this subject. Notice what they say, I love. They didn't say I learned much, but I love this subject. I think it's a great compliment, because it says that you have really engaged them fully as persons, no? Not just their minds, but they as persons, they as learners. Again, second part, parang reflection, parang I think the only thing that I've added here is that how could we help them deeply understand what they have learned online, no? And then the action part, I think I did not make any revisions to it, no? How do we encourage and provide opportunities for students to act on what they have learned? Now, acting may not necessarily be parang, that does not mean acting out, but what it means is that, is there an opportunity for students to concretize what they have learned? Whether that means creating another activity in their online module, or whether that means doing something offline, no? So in a sense, something that allows them to basically express what they have learned. And the latter part, once again, is this part where we're asking, so how do we assess the growth of our students through the courseware that we're actually doing? Or in our case, parang in each module that we're actually creating for them. So once again, if you take all these things together, this is the online learning environment that we want to create for our students, so that this whole thing here really is like, parang this is the courseware that you're creating, no? And you as teacher, our teachers will be creating this learning environment so that our students may be able to, even in this time, still appreciate the truth. All of these things, as I've mentioned, I've already shown this to those from SAS, no? Could be concretely implemented, no, in the form of sections that we will find in a typical module. So here's an example of a module. Let me just shift again. A module that can be found on Moodle, no? Currently, there's an online course there where you can look at this template again. But what it contains is the overview, learning outcomes, required learning activity, reflection part, learning assessment, further resources, and evaluation. Now, if you noticed, practically there's really nothing new in terms of what we have been doing, in the sense, no? If we take a look at what we have created in our syllabus or how we have arranged our OIDP, no? It's this thing, but now implemented, okay, consciously implemented in courseware, no? So at the heart of this courseware is the module that we are creating. Now, just to again, parang put these components into a certain context. Now, we could think, as I said, the IPP in terms of implementation is concretely expressed in the traditional technique that Jesuits and Jesuit teachers have always been using, no? And I think perhaps at some point we are perhaps we are doing it as well, no? And it's simple, no? From the time when the Ratio Studiorum, which is the forerunner of the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm, ito na lagi yung technique: pre-lectio, lectio, and repetitio. Pre-lectio is you preview parang what is going to happen. Lectio is the actual learning experience. Repetitio is a reinforcement of that learning experience. So if you look at the questions again, if we look at this process, basically what we'd like to ask from our faculty is to lead them into thinking, so in creating this pre-lecture, what do I want my students to learn out of their experience? Concretely speaking, this can be shown in some of the components there, which I will show earlier. And then how will I prepare my students for their learning experience? In the lecture part, again, see, it resonates with the experience part in the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm. How will I design and organize activities and resources that I will provide my students so that they can be fully engaged and motivated, not just to learn, but to learn how to learn. So that's, I think, parang where we're driving at, especially given this opportunity to be able to revolutionize once again parang how we're teaching. No? And then the latter part is repetition, which is really what activities, what content should I be giving my student to help reinforce their learning experience. Now, putting these things parang might seem like a very technical, mechanical way of teaching, no? But then again, typical of Ignatius, no? And typical of Jesuit education. And dito parang sometimes the Jesuits are faulted for it because in as much as you have a structure, no, the structures could be overridden by certain principles. No? So, I mean, we're not talking about hard and fast rules here. We're talking about these principles taking into account the humanity of the persons that we're trying to teach and the humanity of the teachers trying to teach it. So what are some of these principles? Once again, to reiterate, cura personalis. No? So in our design, this principle hopefully will be something that will be always at the back of our minds. No? That the learning experiences expressed in the concrete, that the learning experiences should always be adapted to the condition of the student engaged in it. You can find this in the annotations of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. Very explicit. No? This is what is found in the annotations of the exercises. It's an indication of our care and concern for the person. Another principle is non multa sed multum, which means not many but much. Once again, in the design of the course, the learning experiences ought to focus on mastery and depth. We know very well that too much information at one time will increase cognitive load. And instead of helping students learn, it will only achieve the opposite. No? And we're seeing this in the experience of our students right now. No? Some of our colleagues, and perhaps maybe in our own teaching experiences, in our own teaching as well, we might be overwhelming students with a lot of content, thinking that if we don't do it, we're not really teaching. No? But then again, the overriding principle is non multa sed multum. How do we design it in such a way that we focus on essentials and we deepen their understanding of the essentials? Once again, not only the essentials in terms of the content that is to be learned, but the essentials in terms of the skills needed in order to learn that content and to learn other content, which perhaps at some point they will have to do on their own later on. And then the third overriding principle here is tantum quantum, which is loosely translated from Latin as much as it helps. Every time in the spiritual exercises, pag nagbigay ng exercises, the director does not follow what is written in the book written by Ignatius, but he only proposes, kung makatulong yan, gamitin mo. Pag hindi, then don't use it, no? But I will give you all these things, but just use the things that will help you enter into the experience. Likewise, transpose into this educational setup, tantum quantum means in the concrete that learning experiences should be adapted, no? Or should adopt strategies and tools only to the extent that it is an aid to learning and not an obstacle or not something that will hinder learning. No? So parang different po yun, no? Kasi it's not about making it more difficult, no? I think ang role, I believe that the role of teachers is to make a difficult subject seem very easy to do, no? Because the subject matter itself is difficult, no? But if you're trying to make a subject more difficult than it is, anong ibig sabihin yun? Maybe it says something about us more than the subject itself, no? But you know, parang I think this is one of the things that you see, parang when we look at master teachers, parang they have a way of making everything seem very easy, when as a matter of fact very difficult, but they make it look very easy, no? Now imagine if we could design our courses that way, and the only way to do that is because we have the expertise, we know the content very much. And that's why parang I think we have that capacity to be able to distill it into something that our students will be able to learn easily. No? So this entire learning experience in the module is also characterized by interactivity. This interaction could be construed in terms of student to content, student to student, and student to instructor. No? Now, I'm very thankful because this idea was initially suggested to me by Dr. Leon Bauyot in his when he provided me a paper from Acera. But it finds resonance, in fact, not only in the IPP but also in many examples of instructional designs. But for our purposes, I think one of the things that we could invite our faculty to think about is to construct this learning experience so that the students could interact not only with content, but also with their fellow students and with their instructors. So in terms of interacting with content, you have here an example of a video where you could put in, for example, pop-ups. No? Our technology right now in Moodle accounts for this kind of course creation, so that you could insert formative assessments even in the lectures that you are providing. No? In terms of student-to-student content, you have forums there, you have chat rooms where our students can interact. You could also still make use of Google, no? The collaborative documents that Google Suite provides can still be inserted in Moodle, no? And they can still form the content. If you want students to be working on something together, it's still there. It's still a tool that can be used. Now, in terms of student to instructor, okay, we can, of course, record our lectures ahead of time. And if we do that, it will relieve us of the stress of having to always prepare for lectures like this every week or every twice in a week, no? But if we have that, then perhaps we could make use of video conferencing in a more strategic way, no? To deepen content, to entertain questions, to engage students in a more personal level. So in the courseware, you can make use of this video conferencing software. You could provide a link, you can insert a link there, or you can make use of something native to Moodle, which is Big Blue Button, which as an aside, parang I noticed in one of the posts by Dr. Kagape, no, kay lady na post dyan sa Facebook, she was able to compare how much data using how much advantage using big blue button, this one, over Zoom or Google Meet, no? Typically daw in her lectures, parang she would be spending more than 1 gigabyte every session. But now that she has been using Big Blue Button, ang nakalagay doon parang 223 megabytes for the same amount of time that she takes in order to conduct synchronous sessions. So this is a tool in the courseware that we could maximize, or we could always live stream our lectures through YouTube. This is something that I do in my own class as well. So all these learning experiences, again, will characterize parang this whole activity, no? So that again, if we take a look at these components, if we have to in a sense look at pre-lecture, lecture, and repetitio, okay. These components, whether they're in Google Classroom or in Moodle, okay, if we are to arrange it, the overview part where the teacher could basically create a video to talk about or introduce the topic, the learning outcomes that have to be present in that module or in that section, and perhaps the additional resources could be a pre-lecture for further learning as well. The lecture part would consist of the required activity and resources that the students will have to do as part of their formal learning experience. Now, all the rest of the activities, the reflection component, the learning assessment that we introduce, and the evaluation, which is really an evaluation on the entire learning experience, forms part of the repetitio in the module. So that if we were to look at it and see how this ties in with the IPP, this entire learning experience, okay, is what underpins this learning experience is the teacher understanding the context of the learners, so that these activities are designed with the learner in mind, not just what the teacher wants to do, but with the learner in mind. Typically, all of this, the components, form part of the experience. But you can be technical about it and say that the experience part, as we might have noted it in our syllabus design, is the actual experience. But really, parang if we go by the spirit of the IPP, this entire thing is the learning experience. The reflection part is expressed in these components. So the learning assessment can also be turned into a moment of reflection. But what we have deliberately noted is the reflection, not as something that you will grade, but as something that will instill in the students the capacity to reflect, or to pause and reflect. The action part could be in the required activities that you'd ask them to do. The action part could also be expressed in the learning assessment that we create, so that part of expressing whether someone has really learned the subject is really by giving a quiz, for example, or by giving an exam. And the evaluation part could be construed in terms of, again, the assessment, the actual assessment, or the student evaluating his entire learning experience. All of these components, if you check the online courses that I've made available through Daigler, parang are there, nandun po yung sample na content nito. Now, the other characteristics of this courseware would be it will take advantage of Moodle's adaptive release mechanism. What does this mean? Adaptive release is the forced sequencing of content whereby before a student can progress to the next level, he must be able or she must be able to demonstrate that he or she has met the requirements of that particular module. No? So it can be as simple as just asking the students to view all the content, or creating it in such a way that the student needs to pass a certain level in order to activate the next module. So this is something that could be found in Moodle as well. Another thing that we can have in mind is the idea of chunking. So in terms of chunking, a question that we can ask is really how much content can we present before we need to stop and review or summarize. No? So parang these are just questions that we could pose to our colleagues, especially as we're crafting a course, so that we could streamline it further and make it more bite-sized. Now, you might ask, in chunking, parang how big should it be? No? Again, the answer is it depends on the learners and the complexity of a topic. No? In the course design blueprint, which some of you might have already seen, there's a part there which we indicated duration. No? So this is all meant to help us chunk our courses further, because now that we can see how much time a student will actually spend, then maybe we might think na baka this is too much. We might have to break it down pa so that parang they don't get overwhelmed by too much information or too much activities. No? Okay, next. And this is something I think that has to be embedded in our courseware as well, to schedule breathing space. No? We know from our own experience as academics that learning can be very exhausting. No? Teaching is exhausting as well, no? But learning is very exhausting. And so I think as instructional designers, we always have to take into account first the learning environment itself, no, and the short attention spans of people in this learning environment. I'm sure at this point, parang you're already struggling to listen to what I'm saying, no? Because parang this is very different from a face-to-face lecture, no. But that has to be taken into consideration as well. So best practices that we have. You have very short videos talking about a single topic and explaining it in very concise ways. Another is to be able to insert mental breaks within modules and in between modules. No? Si Shercy submitted to me parang a sample of their module, and what she did in that module was to insert some kind of breathing space for the students. No? So I think this is something that we have to take into account as well. I think one useful thing that we could use is to think in terms of time on task. What does this mean? Time on task is really the total learning time spent by a student in learning a course. But this time on task could be divided in terms of instructional time, meaning the time that a teacher spends teaching a course. So that could include the design and even the content that you will be giving students as part of your teaching. But it also has to take into account the time that students will spend in actually accomplishing the task. So sometimes yun parang parang in the concrete, it means listing down the duration, parang how much time are you actually lecturing there and how much time are you giving for students. If we're teaching a 54-hour course, no, how could we break it in such a way, no, that we don't take up the 54 hours just instructional time, no, but rather break it so that perhaps a fourth of that is really instructional time, and the rest of that is giving time for students to accomplish their task. So for me, this is actually helpful because it allows me to pace myself and determine how much effort do I have to make when I'm teaching online. No? I could put in there, for example, the time I need to check what they put in there, parang an hour or 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours, depende, no? Or the time that I spend actually recording and putting myself out there, or the time that I spend for lecture. No? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to consume the entire time for synchronous lectures. no? That is part of instructional time. But so is the recorded lectures that you make. It's still part of instructional time. No? And parang looking at this distinction might help us concretely implement this whole idea of chunking. So I guess at this point, parang I'll end with this because I think I'm already overwhelming you with too much information. No? Studies have shown that for adults, parang after 2 hours, you need a mental break. No? But siguro ang kwan dito is I'll just pause and perhaps elicit questions from you. Because after this, I think what we need to be improved to focus on is learning actual online instructional technologies. So what we can do for the next steps is learning how to produce content using video, what tips and tricks we could share with our faculty, how we could make use of the technologies already in Moodle to start building our own content. So this could be siguro the future steps that we could take. Pero what we did right now is just to clarify it from the instructional design part, no? And next is really to focus on the actual tools that we need to use so that we can contribute and enhance further the content that is being produced by our colleagues. So let me end with that. And perhaps at this point, if you would have questions, I would I hope I can answer the questions that you have in mind. Thank you po.
Hello, Father. Mildred. May
Hi,
question
Dred.
ako.
Mm-mm.
Yes, good afternoon, Father. Father, I'm actually, doon ako na-drawn sa chunking. Ang chunking, Father, kasi dinivide mo siya sa instructional at saka even the time sa student, no? Should it be part doon sa team, for example, nag-focus sa content, or it should be depending on us as IDs? Kasi I was thinking, what if, Father, yung kasi magkaiba kaming teachers teaching the same subject kasi GE course siya. Paano yan, Father? Magkakaiba kami ng let's say, the chances na magkaiba yung instructional time namin. And also sa student, because relative man yan sa student, Father. Kung gaano sila kabilis or kung gaano kasi considering maraming estudyante. So how do we deal it? The maximum, the average, or paano siya i-chunk, Father? Yan lang po.
Okay. Thank you for that question. I think parang you have to find parang a certain common mean, parang golden mean in terms of it. No? Parang imagine yourself as the learner and basically timing yourself. How much time typically, parang realistically will I take, no? If I were parang an average student. So yun yung ikuha natin sa duration so that more or less parang you will be able to see meron dyan mabilis talaga mag-accomplish, meron talaga mabagal. But typically, parang if you were doing your work and you were this is the amount of time that it will take you to accomplish something. Now, ito kasi yung problema kapag hindi tayo in terms of instructional time and time spent on accomplishing tasks, no? Kasi we could be thinking that parang kulang pa rin kasi and we keep on assigning so many things, but as a matter of fact, the student is already spending so much time just on one subject to the detriment of the other subjects, di ba? And I think parang dito minsan parang it's not parang sometimes yung question hindi pedagogy kasi minsan parang pride as teacher na parang hindi dapat ganito ganyan, no? Pero I think parang this is something that we really have to discuss further among ourselves kasi if our interest is really making sure that we have effective teaching strategy, no? I think we have to move towards that whole idea of really parang looking more in detail, parang how much instructional time do I actually need if I am teaching a typical 45 what do you call this, 45 student na class, no? How much time will I have to spend just grading, for example? And sometimes maybe at this point, and this is where we'll be surprised, because of the amount of material that we give in, we are spending more time than what we should be spending for a particular course. So parang I think, Red, parang it would be a good exercise to be able to, you know, break it down talaga. So how much time does it take you to check, halimbawa, well here, kung quizzes lang na objective, it can be automated already, no? So in fact, parang the time that you will need to spend is just to take a look and check parang if all the results are there. So that will limit, for example, the instructional time in that particular module, no? Or in your courseware. Or if you have recorded videos already, that could already be counted in terms of the instructional time for that particular course, no? Pero kailangan yata talaga na parang pag-usapan yung and i-outline mismo how much time typically do we have to spend to be able to teach, let's say, a 45 students na class, no? And then parang to also take into account um, you know, parang the time that students will have to make, no? Kasi minsan parang gusto natin na parang overwhelmed ka kasi ang dami mo i-check, pero ganun din, padamihan mo palalo yung mga student para marami silang ginagawa, no? Parang but we end up expanding our time on task, no? Kaya minsan hindi nakaka-attend sa ibang klase yung ibang estudyante kasi it's being hugged by a particular class because hindi conscious tayo in terms of instructional time and time spent on accomplishing tasks. So what I'm saying here is I think parang this is where, kasi since sa core courses natin, di ba, we're sort of agreeing on what could be parang an ideal way of actually breaking down this time, no, into chunks, no. So pwede yan, but it will become, I think the question will become more difficult pagdating sa mga professional courses, no? But right now, parang I think there's an opportunity to be able to come to a certain consensus in terms of putting it all together. Parang how much time does a teacher or can a teacher actually spend in teaching a particular class, no? So siguro as ID, parang yun yung question that we pose, no? Kung titingnan natin all the things that you have created in terms of content, how much time was that really parang in terms of instructional time, no? And with all the activities that we have, how much time is it? Parang realistically, parang is that no, parang kung sabihin natin na ang design natin ng course is for 54 hours. Baka we realize kaya pala tayo napapagod kasi 200 hours pala ang total time on task natin sa pagturo natin ng subject at this point, no, including what the students are doing. I don't know if that answered your question, Red.
Yes, Father. Pero that Father should also be identified by the course development team members, Father, no?
Yes, kasi
employee nila.
Oo, kasi sila man nakaalam kung sila kunyari magbigay ng content, di ba? How much time would it need? So parang ikaw as ID, parang mag-compute ka.
Okay.
Parang titingnan mo kung proportionate ba to, no? Or kung grabe na ang for the teacher part, parang grabe kasi kung mag-check siya, he will need to spend this time for this course, no? Actually, kung seryosohin natin yung 54 hours of teaching, di ba, spread throughout, it will actually make it easier to teach online kung maklaro natin yon, so that kahit na you don't have to spend that entire 54 hours just by yourself. I don't know if that makes sense, though.
Yes, Father. Thank you, Father. Thank you.
Thank you, Red.
Father, may hapon.
Hi, Mar.
Sige, Father, what you have done is, and I've been listening manin before pa. So what you have done is to provide us, the instructional designers, the foundations and the principles that is IPP inspired. So we will not be dealing with any other models because we have already our model, and that is the IPP model for our instructional design. So now, like yesterday, Father, sa among meeting sa theology department, no, so uh, I'm just thinking aloud. So you presented kanina yung format, no, yung overview, learning outcomes, required learning activities that we have in our OIDP and the syllabus. And so the task now is for the course development team to fill this out. Tama, Father, no? Tapos, the course design blueprint that you have provided us before, that could also be a template for us to really deal with as a course development team. Tama ba, Father? Okay. And then, as instructional design, this is where I am really interested in, is that it is our role to also inform, what's that, just inform, teach or guide the course development team in terms of the tools in order for the learning environment, the online learning environment, to be engaging, interactive, user friendly, murag ana, Father, no. So murag kana amo ang kana akong understanding hana, that as we learn these tools and as we learn how to do the videos, the one with the pop-up thing and all that, that such that once we go back to the course development team, we can also help them in terms of really navigating all this content in a manner that they would also be, that would also be palatable both for the faculty and also for the students. Ato siya, Father. So yesterday, for example, na sa TU 1000, so because ang understanding nato is that the online courseware should be the base courseware. That is true to all the faculty. Later na nang pag-customize per faculty. So we should come up with the most essentials of the essentials, pinaka essentials. So yesterday we come up with about 7 essentials, and nag-divide namin, no, sa amuang team na kaniha 8 hours lang yun ni sa imuha. 8 hours lang yun ni siya nga module maximum, no, murag pinaka maximum. And then conscious sa amua na of that would be about 2.5 weeks, let's say 2.5 weeks. So but in this 2.5 weeks, the content, the lecture, and everything should only be 6 hours. So para naa kay break, nakatong 2 hours, mo to ang whatever you can do, or if you want to hold a monitoring, a feedbacking, a synchronous session, just to check where the students are. So mura katong amo ang kuan gahapon, Father. So such that ang tama ba akong understand, because I gave up that position to be the course development team, that for the fact that wala lagi gusto mo take the training again, Father, kay training mga video unsa ba ni, Father, no. So am I correct in understanding that that is my role as the instructional design, to really help them to really also engage them into this new learning environment, no, and then to see that the course is within the, not just within the standards of the IPP, but also to check na para sa tanan makalipay gyud ni siya, Father, nga kada gani mabalanse na ay sense of harmony. Tama ba akong understanding, Father? Thank you, Father.
Thank you very much for sharing, Mar. That's correct. Inana gyud, no? Kaya that's why we need to learn also. Una, parang with that grounding in our instructional design, parang we can always check and challenge faculty in terms of what they're doing. But at the same time, we provide them the support with our understanding of paano ba to i-translate online, di ba? Kunyari, sige, gusto ko mag-lecture, pero ang alam ko lang na pag-lecture, dapat mag-Google Meet lang all the time, no? But we can offer, that's why part of what we will do is to explore parang the other tools, no? So that you can actually do this para bukas may lakad ka, no? Gusto mo ilagay na diyan para you don't have to be doing that all the time, no? So we will yon parang your role is to also introduce parang and suggest ways by which they could parang concretize parang what they want to do, but this time to be able to do it online. So what you're doing, as a matter of fact, parang is already, I think, what we're expected to do. Kaya mahirap lang siya kasi parang una, we will have to be dealing with people, our colleagues, no? And syempre parang we would have to understand parang people have different understandings, different preferences. Pero parang tayo lang is just to make sure that we're parang always maintaining that balance, no? Na yes, content, but at the same time, teka, wag nating kalimutan na baka mapagod na masyado ang teachers or baka mapagod na masyado ang mga estudyante. So, kita ang magpatunga jud and maintaining that tension so that online learning becomes a parang shall we say a less stressful experience for all of us. So hopefully okay to nga akong tubag sa imong kuan, Mar.
Tama, Father, tama. Na-affirm ko, Father, na-affirm. Thank you.
Kana gyud ang kana gyang role sa ID. Are there any questions po?
Father, meron lang ako.
Eileen.
Oo. Tayo as instructional designers, 'di ba, we will be working with our colleagues, no, sa cluster. Tapos yung magde-develop nun talaga yung mga faculty assigned doon in teaching the subject. Kailan po papasok yung AA?
In the yung AAs will be tinap siya ng ibang school ng mga ibang schools to attend to the technical aspects of building a course. So that if in case parang faculty are not able to do it, the AAs will be the ones to do it as well. But it seems that in some departments, ayaw na nila kasi parang they could build it on their own eh. So nilagay lang yun siya just so that parang we can always find somebody. Let's say I'm a faculty na parang medyo technophobic ako, no? But at least there's somebody who could help me put up my content online. But then again, yun, parang as instructional designer, parang you could bridge yung course technician and also the one who would want to develop a course online, no?
Okay, sige, Father. Pero yung gagamitin natin, Father, from second semester onwards will be the Moodle na? Kasi many of us are still using Google Classroom. So,
yes,
meaning we'll be migrating our materials to
Moodle. That is correct. Kasi many of the features that we've talked about cannot be supported by Google Classroom. But we will not let go of it entirely. We will still use, we can use Google Meet, we can use all the other Google Docs, etc. Pero the home
materials,
the main platform talaga will be Moodle.
Okay, sige. Yeah, that's all, Father. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. May question pa po?
Father, so
yes,
for example sa Theo na naman migi-assign nga course technician, okay na mi. Among us faculty kay she already accepted, sige ako na ang course technician, ako na mag-upload ani sa Diagler, but she also would like to have further training, like for example how do you duplicate the courseware, di ba, Father, to different faculty.
Nag-appeal na ba siya atong mga training namo?
Wala pa, Father, pero she's already good in Diagler, so
okay.
So it's more on katulang mga other technicalities siguro sa pag-transfer sa ani ato. Pero she's really good na.
Sige, parang kasi we usually have Wednesday and Friday pero on-site kay naaman ng mga AA dire. Naga-training
On-site.
kami dito sa computer lab Wednesdays and
Mm.
Fridays ng morning from 9 to 10:30 a.m. So we still have
Okay.
we have one tomorrow, and next week we have 2 more sessions pa. So
Sige.
far we've already done 4. Tomorrow will be the 5th session.
Okay. Inform ko lang siya, Father, to contact you.
Sige, send lang email para makuan lang, ma-inform lang tomorrow.
Sige. Sige, Father. Thank you.
Any questions pa po? Hopefully, as IDs, parang you'll be open, of course, to learning the tools kasi yun nga parang our faculty will be turning to us kung kunyari gusto ko ganito, so what do you suggest? And that's why parang the next sessions that we'll have will be dealing specifically on the instructional tools that we can use for online education. So we won't do coding, medyo complicated na yun. Pero we have, for example, H5P, using that. No? I'll show you parang how, if you want to do a video, parang the techniques to use to be able to create captions immediately. We'll do parang how we could present slides in a way na that they can be very interactive, but at the same time yun. So many of the kumbaga tips and tricks, yun I think yung isang the other side that we can offer for our colleagues. No? So a grounding in terms of the whole theory behind it, the whole instructional design behind it, but at the same time parang the practical skills to be able to implement. Let's say gusto niya ganito, collaborative document, gusto niya na parang depende sa kung anong gawa. So we will try to explore and learn many of these online tips and tricks to basically expand our repertoire of online instructional tools. Will we create meta courses for the electives and core? Yes, Maricar. So the first one, the courseware that we will be building, yan siya, and then it will be replicated and then distributed and assigned to faculty. But that becomes the base courseware template for that particular course. So that the faculty can now customize, if they want, their own courseware, but we already have something that we can make available as part of our Open University. So all suggestions that will be coming from our faculty in terms of what helped them in their own courseware or running their own courseware, we can now integrate into the base template so that parang we can always upgrade its version, so to speak, with the input coming from faculty. Meta courses. So base template pala yung kuha natin. And then once it has been built, then we distribute it and assign it to the faculty. So sila nang bahala for to manage it, but at least it complies with our standard course product parang ganun. Thank you. Any questions pa po? I will make available to everyone. There are 3 books on instructional design. Yung dalawa doon are the more practical, yung isa medyo theoretical. Pero I think if you want to just brush up on what it entails, parang you can do that. So I will share these resources with you. Kasi yung isang course, for example, yung isang libro, basically meron siyang checklist, no? And parang it's really a very practical book in terms of how to build an online course, no? And then the other book, ganun din, pero it's more focused on the actual course design, not necessarily for online course design, but course design in preparation for online. So yung dalawa po could be of practical use. I will share that through yung sa Diegler po na yung sa Diegler na nagawa na courseware on instructional design and foundations. I will upload the files there so that you can access it as well. So I'd like to invite you to check it out, especially yung training course on learning to teach online. I think it was the University of New South Wales who actually built up the content for that, and it's very comprehensive, and surely it will upgrade your own understanding of this online learning environment.
Father, hopefully this is the last question from me.
Ay, okay lang, okay lang.
Gahapon magud Father ng pangutan. This is technical but I would like to relay na regarding sa Moodle, no. So now, because we who are using Diegler, for example, we are only given one specific template or course, no, for us. And then although I am, let's say I'm teaching 3 classes, pero isa lang yun na siya ka course ning ana. So pag abot ba sa base courseware, are we also in that type of environment na nga ang, for example, ang Teo, no, sample Teo 1000, isa lang ang i-upload sa pangalan sa professor, and then di ba within that course, Father, makakam up ang kaog mga tawag ani groups ana. Ing ana ba siya, Father, or isa-isa gyud kada section? So katong that was a question that was raised yesterday in our meeting, so we were arguing sort of unsaon siya. Thank you, Father.
Thank you for that question, Mark. For now, we will just provide separate courses for every section. Kasi if you're not used to teaching sa Moodle, it can get overwhelming na isang course tapos you're handling different groups. Especially big groups kung classes. Pero we can move towards that direction. Siguro parang after a certain period na ma-familiarize na ng mga teachers, we'll move kasi mas efficient pag isang course lang. But it can be very overwhelming manggod pag hindi ka sanay nung ano. So kahit na gituro mo pero parang naga-multitask ka ng isang ano. Ako personally nalibog ko when I started when yung ganong groups and groupings. So personally parang I would not recommend it, especially for those parang being introduced pa lang to Moodle. But surely maybe in the next iteration we could implement it because para dili siya confusing na ano. Okay. Si Jocelyn, metacourse. Okay, kung naamoy metacourse na kon, no? Okay na to kung naamoy ingana na kon. So we will maybe get feedback from you, IDs, no? Kung unsa ang preference sa ninyo, no, kasi maybe for some basig dili sila kwan ba, parang especially for those who are just migrating, for those who are already fairly proficient in Moodle, kwan na to siya, okay siguro yan. So I think I would need to get personal feedback from each of you in terms of what you would prefer in terms of how we will be distributing the courses. But for now, parang we'll start with the base template and distribute it to the faculty according to the number of sections that they have. So that's the basic distribution process. But if you prefer na, we'll just build a course and then just activate it as meta course. We can do that as well. It certainly will be easy for everyone to have that. It's the same as meta course, Father. Okay. May question pa po. I'm sorry, it's already 5:28. I'm sure parang don't want to have already taken up your time to this afternoon. would everyone be agreeable if we could meet again next week? But next week, it will really be more focusing on the instructional tools. Okay po. Would Tuesday afternoon be ideal for you? If let's say if we have 3 o'clock to 5 p.m. Tuesday, okay lang po.
Father, hindi
Sige.
ako pwede.
Ay, hindi ka pwede, Mar?
May meeting with HR, Father, sa isang committee.
Okay. Sige. But Mar, okay lang ba kung if we record it and then just give it to you kung if everyone else is ano?
Yes, okay lang, Father, basta na-record. Thank you.
We will do a recording. So okay po, I will send an invitation to everyone. Pwede po ulit pa ano na lang if possible. Kasi mas save man itong transcript, no? I will just take note of the names present here so that I'll know whom to send the invitation to. Okay, anyway. Sige po, if there are no questions for now, perhaps there'll be more questions. You can just send me an email if you have questions, or para if you want to verify or confirm or perhaps suggest something. I'm open to it as well. So thank you po, no. Parang I think with you there, parang it makes this job less stressful kasi at least marami na tayo. So thank you po. So I'll just send you a Zoom link invitation to Tuesday at 3 p.m. for next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father.
Salamat, Father.
Salamat po. Thank you for your time and for your patience. Thank you.
Salamat,
Thanks,
Father.
Father.
Thank you po.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Ingat po. Bye-bye. Thank you. Hi, Jai.
Hi, Pods!
Saan
Kamusta
na?
ikaw? Okay lang.
So, kung na
Pwede
umalis.
na ba?
Teka lang.